Welcome back, everyone, to another episode. Today, we are speaking with Phil Rizzo. Phil is the founder and owner of Rizzo's Protective Group. He's a fighter against the forces of fear, racism, and xenophobia. He is a security consultant, criminal justice instructor, reform activist, and warrior. That's what I love, brother. He is the host and executive producer of Light 'em Up, a podcast show listened to across 99 countries. Phil, welcome to the show.
Enrique, it's so great to be here. It's such an honor to have a chance to sit and talk with you. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm ecstatic about this conversation. Folks, we will be speaking about the perils of high-risk behaviors. And if you have a company or have had an issue with high-risk behavior, this is the episode for you to listen in on. But before we get into all of that, Phil, tell us a little bit about you.
Oh, thanks, Enrique. I really appreciate it. Like you mentioned, my name is Phil Rizzo, and I'm the owner and founder of Rizzo's Protective Group. We are a high-risk security consulting firm headquartered out of Akron, Ohio, with offices in the Bronx, New York, and in Cerro Alto in the Dominican Republic. And we mitigate high-risk behavior. And as you'll probably hear me say throughout this show, that risk can only be mitigated. It can't be eliminated. And but we try to protect people where they are and keep them safe so they can enjoy the things that they do in a safe and structured manner.
And I love that. Mitigation is where it's at. That's where we have an opportunity to play our part. And as you mentioned, these things will come up. It's a matter of whether you are ready for it or not. And typically, the scale it tips on those that are not ready, and they end up being a responder instead of someone that already has something in place to meet and decrease the results of something like a high risk behavior incident.
Sure.
Now, as we go into this, tell us about your definition of what high risk behavior is.
You have to start out by asking things like what can go wrong, what's the likelihood that things will go wrong, and what are the consequences. So high risk behavior would be, in my professional opinion, anything that either puts the enterprise in jeopardy or the people, exposing them to hurt, harm, or danger in any way, shape, or form. That's what I consider to be high risk behavior, doing things that can ultimately end your life.
And the life piece is really the ultimate end all to be all, right?
Yeah,
There are other implications that come with high risk behaviors. Most of them do not end in life threatening or life ending situations. The
yeah,
common day to day would be like high spending, right? Somebody giving away a whole lot of things, which are other indicators to maybe
sure.
there's life at risk.
I think a high risk behavior that people engage in on a regular basis would be driving without a seatbelt. The impact of a crash on the human body is tremendous. And a lot of people don't realize that speed or velocity is what kills. And I think that's one of the most common high risk behaviors that people engage in, but don't give it much thought.
Yes, and I totally agree. You remind me of an incident that I drove up to on the highway several years back. I would say back in 2012, Mississippi I-10, on my way to work. I saw this man running down the highway with a baby. Obviously, it was not his baby.
Yeah.
And we thought there was something wrong. So we, as active citizens and ones that are responsible, turned the car around and went to go see what this was about. And sure enough, it was a car that was overturned, went into a a tumble, I guess, and
Hmm.
ended up in the wood areas. And this man rolled up on the incident and grabbed the baby out of the car.
I see.
And so to your thing about no seatbelt and high speeds,
Yeah.
another thing was a long trip with no rest. And so these are also things that can end up into a bad situation, which this one did. Unfortunately, several people died. I
Oh,
was able to be there to witness all of this. And unfortunately, life did end in those practices, but it could be just that. So if you're listening and you are one of those that are running around without a seatbelt, those things are there to keep you safe. Now,
certainly.
leaders have roles in making sure, and we spoke about mitigation earlier, and we spoke about it at the beginning. There's a role that leaders have in mitigating these behaviors. What would those be?
Well, I think initially, leadership involves providing a vision and a direction and coordination, as well as the motivation towards achieving and what we're talking about here today, like emergency management goals. So the leader, uh, the vision for the enterprise, or even all the way down to the smallest mom and pop little bodega, it's the same. You have to have the vision. You have to be able to see what the end game is, what you're trying to achieve, and you have to be able to provide direction and coordination, as well as the resources in order to achieve the goals that you desire. So a leader involved in trying to mitigate risk has to be able to work across the enterprise, uh, to communicate effectively. I mean, with every aspect of the enterprise, whether it be finance, whether it be HR, whether it be legal, the legal department. The communication is key. But in every relationship, whether it be a friendship, whether it be a romantic relationship, fiance, husband, and wife, it matters not. The key in every relationship is effective oral communication. And without that, there will never be an understanding or a meeting of the minds, which is essential in this type of leadership.
Absolutely. And you mentioned a bodega, which I'm completely familiar with,
Yeah, yeah,
being a resident and growing up in the Bronx, New York.
yeah,
You have leaders in this capacity. They own a storefront, highly trafficked. Most people come in and out of there.
sure.
And even in those, we have seen different things go down at different times of the day.
Yeah,
A
yeah,
simple shoplifting to armed robbery to also murder of other individuals in your store,
yeah,
because we have seen that play out in the news and a lot of people have seen those things. So as a leader, it's not just building a business and putting it in a corner and opening your doors. You have to consider these events happening at your site.
sure.
It could be a bodega, but it also could be an enterprise, a huge office that we just saw on the news. A banker,
Yeah,
young man, come find out that he's about to get canned and then come back to the office and blow up a bunch of people, right? So
yeah, yeah.
it happens and you have to plan for those things.
Well, I mean, you bring up two very interesting and very accurate points. Number one of the things that we do at Rizzo's Protective Group is we provide a training called tactical termination. Because just like you mentioned at the bank, where that active shooter event took place, um, the employee was being terminated. And a lot of times people don't know how to terminate people with tact. And we have a training module that talks exactly to that point about training with tact, because maybe a person wasn't the best employee, maybe they were late, maybe they earned their firing or their termination, whatever the reason was. Um, at the end of the day, that person is a human being, and we as leaders in the enterprise or in the bodega. And I still want to talk about my experience at my brother-in-law's bodega in Union City, New Jersey. But we have to train people in the HR space how to terminate with tact, because you don't want an individual to come back to your facility with anger issues, with aggression, and with a weapon looking to get even or to even a score with someone. So a lot of times the way we do things in HR, in security, it'll have an impact on the outcome of how a termination goes forward. What you want to do is you want to separate from the employee, and you want that separation to be forever. You don't want to terminate a person in such a way that they come back with anger and aggression. Now, to my brother-in-law's bodega in Union City, New Jersey, you know, you're in a confined space in a bodega. And yeah, there's shoplifting, there's all kinds of things that go on there. But the bodega owner, if he's wise, which Juan is a very wise man, mucho sabiduría él tiene, um, he he has protection. He has a firearm that is fully registered, fully licensed. Um, so you have to be prepared. You know, the best time to prepare for an emergency is before one occurs, not during nor after. So those are the kind of mindsets that we have to go forward with. We have to keep in our hearts and in our minds. Preparation is the key.
That is where companies get the most bang for their effort. It's in preparing prior to something happening. Now, can we have a plan for every little thing that may occur? It's almost impossible to do that.
Yeah.
But you have to take things that have occurred and see how that would impact you and what you would do to create some type of structure where you guide your people. The last thing you want to do in a fire is start yelling where to go, and you have three leaders yelling where to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? There should be some policy that says, in the case of a emergency that deals with fire,
Yeah.
this is the exit you go to. This
Sure.
is the location we meet up and muster for accountability purposes. And then we will make sure that the authorities are contacted to address the issue, or if you can, help in that mitigation. So there's a fire, there's extinguishers, and so people need to be aware. And you mentioned communication earlier on. That is the best way to communicate with your people, is by having both the policy structure to guide them, but also somewhere to practice, right? And
Yeah.
get this ingrained in their head. So, what should companies consider when creating their risk management policies?
Well, they have to train, and that's number one. Eventually, they'll have to do the training because you need to have that muscle memory to know what to do in an emergency. But a company, if they can approach the whole process with the concept of deterrence, detection, delay, and response, DDDR or D cubed R, that's the acronym. Um, a company has to sit down ahead of time because you know uh, success comes through many counsels. Okay, if you seek advice prior to a situation, you can train for it and prepare for it. So a company has to be in the mindset of preparation and deterrence, because they have to ask the questions, what can go wrong, number one. Then they have to ask the question, what's the likelihood that it will go wrong? And finally, they have to ask the question, what are the consequences if it goes wrong? So, there's an entire mindset that has to be applied to this. A company needs to have goals and objectives, and they have to be clearly defined. They have to have a mission space and values that talk about how they are going to mitigate risk, and they have to live it. If you have a policy and procedure manual that just sits on the shelf and gathers dust and no one knows what the practice or the policy or the procedure is, it- when the emergency happens, you're going to have everyone running in opposite directions. So you have to have policies and procedures and standards in place, and they have to be communicated. And you have to make your stakeholders or shareholders, they have to be accountable. You have to constantly hold them accountable for the standards so that they're high and they're ready to go. Because um, risk mitigation is a fluid process. It's not just like you do it one day and that's it. No, it's over the lifetime of your existence. We do risk mitigation in our daily lives. For example, we buy car insurance. In the event that something happens, someone hits us, or God forbid we hit somebody, we have insurance. And that mitigates our risk. It mitigates our financial risk. So companies, whether they're the largest in the world or the smallest mom and pop, they have to be thinking ahead because situations happen and they happen in a blink of an eye, and you have to be prepared. If you're not prepared, it's going to show. It's going to show.
Well, speaking about financial risk, because typically the insurance industry is there to provide that type of resource. And companies undoubtedly are thinking, okay, Enrique and Phil, you're talking about putting this in place, creating this policy. I need to do this and I should be doing that. Who's going to pay for it? It's usually the question that most companies will ask. Enrique, you mentioned I have to do this, but where am I going to get the money to do it? So let me just ask, how can my security posture drive my profit margin, because all companies are going to be asking the money question?
Yeah, that's a great question, Enrique. It really is. So a lot of people don't give consideration or think that security is a profit driver, but security most definitely is a profit driver because um, let's just say, for example, you have a business and it's unsafe and people realize that it's unsafe. That's going to affect people wanting to go to your location. So you have to you have to put in place ahead of time the necessary things, and you have to allocate money. Budget is important in this process. The enterprise or the mom and pop, whoever it is, you have to budget money for security and for safety. Um, it's just part of the leadership process that you have to have the vision and you have to be able to almost see things before they happen. I know some people might think, oh, you have to be a soothsayer or stuff like that. No, but your experience is that things happen unexpectedly. I had a tree fall down in my front yard due to high winds last week. Did I anticipate that tree was going to fall down? No, but it did. So then I had to put in place uh, things in order to get past the tree falling down. I had to call a tree company to come in and cut the lumber. So there's all kinds of things that you have to be ready to do, and you have to be ready in a blink of an eye in order to do it. And the main part is capital expenditures. If you don't spend money on your home or if you don't spend money on your business, then you're not going to be able to advance it forward the way you need to. And that involves having cameras, especially in the bodega that we talked about, having cameras in the bodega to watch each and every aisle because there are people who shoplift. You have to have a fire suppression system that's active, and that's by law. I mean, you can't really operate without having adequate fire suppression uh, systems and services in your building. But, you know, there's a whole host of questions And that's really at the heart of risk mitigation, asking questions and keep asking questions until you're to the point to where you've mitigated the risk to where you can advance forward without being up all night worrying about it. That's what you want to do. You want to be able to mitigate the risk so you can sleep at night and keep your people safe.
And as business owners, what you want to address as well is the safety of your people and whether or not you can pay a price before, during, or after. And I'll tell you that during and after is going to cost you a whole lot more
Yeah, yeah, that's
than
true.
before. So,
Absolutely. You know, it might be dating myself here, but Beretta used to say, you can pay me now or you can pay me later, you know? And costs are involved in everything, you know, and you can mitigate your damage by planning ahead, you know. We always say in emergency management, it's important to be honest, open, and doing those two things often. You have to be transparent. You know, when there's an emergency, when something terrible happens, emergency managers, we run to the conference room, but then we walk in the room calm, cool, and collected because you never want to let the people see you sweat. You never want to let them know uh, that it's affected you to the point to where you can't answer questions honestly, openly, and transparently. And the most important thing is to control the narrative. If you don't control the narrative about your emergency, someone else will. And trust me, hermano, you don't want someone else to control your narrative. You want to be open, honest, and transparent. And an example of that, you know, God forbid, is when an airplane crashes. The airline, it behooves them to be open, honest, and transparent, and to embrace the surviving members of the souls that were lost on board, and to do that for the long haul. Do it, and you will do what's right. Do it not, and you will find out what happens to your corporation.
yeah, and using that Beretta example, you could pay me as a security consultant or you can pay me as an investigator. The investigator is double the price, right? So
It's true.
so
It's true.
take your choice, but either way, you'll have to make some decisions as a company owner, a business owner, a leader. You'll have to make some decisions, and it's best to do it on the front side. Now, to every security scenario, there's an ugly side. We
Sure.
just saw one play out in a bank. We've talked about several in bodegas in New York, right? Where the enterprise was not ready to address the threat that they was faced with at the time, right?
Hmm.
It reminds me of that young kid that was mistakenly attacked. He ran into a bodega. Instead of the bodega owners finding out what was going on, they pushed him out of the bodega to get murdered in front of their property.
I see. I see.
And the kid ran to the hospital. He didn't make it, but it
That's
all happened in that property.
yeah.
You go to that bodega, it's not open.
Yeah. Liability. Yeah.
Shut down.
Mhm.
The community shut it down.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so there are things that as business owners we will be faced with, and that's an ugly side of the end of not being prepared, but it happens. So what other ugly sides of not having an enterprise security risk management program have you seen?
Well, that's pretty much the ultimate right there. And I would say that is the worst case scenario, death. You know, we had spoke earlier about, you know, trying to prevent that and trying to mitigate the ultimate, which would be death of an employee or death of a family member or something like that. And I think if we're talking just briefly about bodega ownership, you need to know the people who come into your store, talk to them, uh, you know, create rapport, create a friendship, get to know them, Um, and thank God Juan does that. Everybody who comes into Juan's bodega, they know him, and he knows them most importantly. Um, but I think what's important is to limit and reduce your liability. Uh, you can be closed down if something terrible happens on your property. Those liability issues are enormously high. Other than that, you can face jail time, prison time. You can be charged criminally for your negligence that happens, and you know, no one wants to spend time behind bars. Okay. So I think those death and prison and financially being wiped out, I think those would be the top three things that you want to try to avoid. And through risk mitigation, through through clear and precise step taking, little by little, forward always, what's the phrase that always comes to my mind? Siempre pa'lante, nunca para atrás. Always forward, never backwards. And but you have to be cognizant. You have to think these things through. Risk mitigation, it's easy to do if you think, if you plan. And it takes time, it takes energy capital, it takes financial capital. Because you don't want to have a camera that looks like someone took their thumb and smeared Vaseline over the lens of the camera. If you have cameras in your location and they don't work or they're not effective, what's the purpose of having them? Now, I know that having cameras doesn't prevent things like bank robberies, because bank robberies happen all the time, but you have to invest in quality equipment so that it'll be there for you when you need it.
Yeah, we've covered a variety of very uh morbid type of results of not having a risk mitigation plan with you,
Yeah,
but it can go all the way to the extreme to a simple access to your company spaces.
yeah,
You
yeah,
didn't take a key card from an employee. You did not change the lock.
yeah. I
You did
mean,
not you did not remove them from an email access, and now they're emailing all your customers, right? I
sure,
mean, these
sure.
little things that could eventually become a bigger thing is what we're talking about. And yes, we covered a deaf situation, but
Sure.
it can go from as something simple as an email access that was not authorized
Yeah.
any longer to
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a great point that you bring up. I mean, every company should have a checklist that they tick off the boxes that they've gotten these things back from the employee prior to, separation. Um, the company has to be prepared because uh, proprietary information, company secrets, trademark information, those can wipe a company out. If someone gets access to your secret formula or your patented products, they can wipe you out in a blink of an eye. And so your IT department has to be strong. It has to be fortified. You can't rely the safety and security of your enterprise just on one person. You have to hire enough people in order to make sure that the process is covered. You have to cover all of your bases, so to speak. So yeah, it runs the gamut, and it can be exhausting trying to prevent all of the attack vectors or all of the angles that you can be attacked. But it's a doable thing. It's a doable thing, and you just want to sit down with someone who knows the process and helps you. Because if you're not being helped, then you're exposed.
I agree. Now, talking about getting a hold of somebody to help you make those decisions or maybe have the experience that you do to get someone on board and on track with their risk mitigation program, how would they contact you if they wanted you to come and take a look at what they had or maybe had a chat on how to go forward with their enterprise in this fashion?
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, they can always reach out to me via cell phone. They can contact me uh, at area code 330. The number is 801-0464. It's my company cell phone. Um, I can be reached via email, and that could be done by my email address is prizzo7778@gmail.com. I also have a corporate email address that I can provide you, that you can provide the public at a later time. And that's simply prizzo at uh, rpgconsultingltd.com. That's kind of a tongue twister to say, but they can find me on LinkedIn, Philip Rizzo on LinkedIn. We're on all social media platforms. They can send me an email if they have questions that they, might want to go into more depth about. They can call me. I'm glad to listen to any concerns. Consultation is no cost to listen to what your concerns are, and they can reach out to you, and I'm sure you'll provide them with the information to get in touch with me. We're online at Rizzo's Protective Group. You can go to www.rpgconsultingltd.com, and yeah, reach out. We're here to help, and we want to help because, like we talked about earlier, we want to prevent people from suffering hurt, harm, or danger. It's doable. It really is. And we're here to help.
Well, absolutely, folks. We will have all that information as part of the show notes and video so that you can get a hold of Phil and his group. I tell you that there is no better time to consider your posture in terms of risk mitigation than right now. So please get a hold of him if you need his help, and we'll have that information ready for you all. Today's episode is sponsored by Triad Leadership Solutions and Superpass, which are powering our website and app, Southern Sweet and Sassy Coffee, and Harchester, London. If you've enjoyed this episode and learned something interesting about the topic covered today, make sure to subscribe and let us know by leaving a comment right now. We're always looking for new ideas and guests that we can add to our show. So if you know of someone or have a topic that you would like featured on the podcast or want to sponsor our show, we love to hear about it by emailing us at triadleadershipsolutions@gmail.com. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode where we dissect leadership from another angle. And as we like to end the show, success to you.